or stepped off the transport shuttle and felt the weight of a foreign world press against his skin. The air on 4 tasted like ash and something burned. His 4 eyes blinked against the harsh sunlight as he adjusted his recording equipment and prepared himself for what the Galactic Council had called a simple observation mission. He was a species that had abandoned warfare 3,000 years ago. His people now served as scholars, archivists, and observers for the greater galactic community. The Council wanted documentation of human military operations, and or had volunteered because he believed it would advance his academic career. Humans were still new to the galaxy, still considered primitive by most civilized species, and studying their violent tendencies seemed like easy work. A human female approached him across the landing platform. She wore armor that showed scratches and burns from recent combat. Her face carried lines of exhaustion that seemed carved into her skin, and her eyes held something or could not identify through his translator implant. "You must be the observer," she said. "I am Captain Laura, commander of the 47th Infantry Division. Welcome to Forward Operating Base Sentinel." Or performed the formal greeting gesture. "I am, or of the 3rd Academic Circle. I am here to document your operations against the Dominion for the Galactic Archives." Captain nodded slowly. "Document whatever you want, but I should warn you about something. Watching and understanding are 2 very different things." Or found her statement puzzling. He had studied over 40 species during his career. He had observed religious ceremonies, mating rituals, and political negotiations across the galaxy. Understanding humans could not be more difficult than understanding the hive-mind communications of the, or the dream speech of the. "I appreciate your concern," he replied, "but I am confident in my abilities." Something flickered across face. It might have been amusement or pity or both. She simply gestured for him to follow her into the base. Forward Operating Base Sentinel was chaos organized into the shape of a military installation. Humans moved everywhere, carrying weapons and equipment and wounded soldiers. Vehicles rolled through mud that seemed to cover everything. The sounds of distant explosions created a constant background noise that made Or's sensitive hearing ache. Captain led him to the barracks area where he would stay during his observation period. Along the way, she introduced him to several soldiers who would be his primary subjects. Sergeant Danny Cole was a tall man with a quiet voice and careful movements. He carried a small photograph in his chest pocket, and Or noticed that he touched it often, as if checking that it was still there. When Or asked about it, Cole simply said it was his daughter and then changed the subject. Corporal Maria Santos served as the unit medic. Her hands were small and gentle, covered in calluses from years of medical work. She smiled easily and asked Or questions about biology, genuinely curious about his species in a way that surprised him. He had expected humans to be self-centered and uninterested in others. Private Park was the youngest of the group, barely 20 years old by human counting. He laughed at jokes that Or did not understand and seemed to find humor in situations that appeared entirely serious. When a nearby explosion shook the building, Park simply commented that they were getting lazy with their aim, and the other soldiers laughed with him. Or began his observations immediately. He recorded everything in careful detail, using the clinical language of academic documentation. He noted that humans appeared disorganized compared to other military species he had studied. They did not move in perfect formation like the bio-soldiers. They did not communicate through efficient neural links like the warriors. They talked constantly, sharing information through inefficient verbal speech, often repeating themselves and asking clarifying questions. He noted their strange rituals. They gathered for meals not out of biological necessity alone, but for social bonding. They shared food even when rations were limited, passing plates to those who had received smaller portions. They told stories about their homes and families, about events that had no relevance to their military mission, about dreams and fears and hopes. They checked on each other constantly. Captain walked through the barracks every evening, speaking individually with soldiers, asking about their mental state in ways that seemed to serve no tactical purpose. Sergeant Cole sat with younger soldiers who seemed troubled, listening to their concerns without offering solutions, simply being present. Or found it all quaint and inefficient. They had learned long ago that emotion was the enemy of productivity. The most effective societies minimized emotional involvement and maximized rational decision-making. These humans were doing everything wrong. He recorded his preliminary conclusions in his personal log that night. Humans were primitive but not unintelligent. Their emotional attachments created vulnerabilities that more advanced species had eliminated. Their military effectiveness suffered from their inability to separate personal feelings from professional duties. They would likely lose this war against the unless they evolved beyond their current limitations. He felt satisfied with his analysis, clear and objective and supported by evidence, exactly what the Galactic Council expected from an observer. Sleep came slowly in the unfamiliar environment. The sounds of the base continued through the night, soldiers moving, equipment humming, voices murmuring in the darkness. Or could hear Sergeant Cole speaking softly to a young soldier in the next room, talking about fishing on some lake back on Earth, describing the patience required to wait for a catch, the peace of sitting in silence surrounded by water. It seemed like a waste of time. But the young soldier's breathing eventually slowed into the rhythm of sleep, and Cole quietly returned to his own bed. Near midnight, an explosion lit up the horizon like a second sunrise, or rushed to the window and saw fire blooming in the distance, painting the clouds in shades of orange and red. Captain appeared beside him. She had not been sleeping either. Her eyes reflected the distant flames as she watched the destruction with an expression or still could not read. "Tomorrow we move into enemy territory," she said. "Get whatever rest you can." Or looked at her face, searching for the emotions his translator could not identify. Fear, perhaps, or determination, or something entirely human that had no equivalent in experience. "I will be ready," he said. Turned to look at him directly. In that moment, standing in the flickering light of distant fires, or felt something shift in his understanding. There was a weight in her gaze that his academic training had not prepared him for. "No," she said quietly, "you will not be. None of us ever are." She walked away into the darkness, leaving or alone with the burning horizon and the first small crack in his certainty. The 47th Infantry Division moved into the ruined city at dawn, or walked in the middle of the formation, surrounded by soldiers who scanned every broken building and shadowed doorway with weapons ready. The silence pressed against his ears like a physical weight. The city had been called New Haven before they arrived. Now it was a skeleton of collapsed structures and burned vehicles and scattered belongings that told stories of people who had fled or died, or saw a child's toy lying in the street, covered in dust but still bright blue. No one stopped to move it. Captain led from the front, which or found tactically foolish. A commander should stay protected, should remain alive to direct operations, but moved through the rubble like she belonged there, her presence seeming to steady the soldiers around her. They attacked without warning. They came from the buildings on both sides, biomechanical soldiers created in vats and programmed for maximum violence. Their bodies were a mixture of organic tissue and metal implants, designed to kill efficiently and feel nothing, or had studied them before this assignment. He knew they were considered one of the most effective military species in the galaxy. The humans should not have been able to fight them. But they did, or watched in shock as the 47th responded to the ambush with a coordination that contradicted everything he had observed about their disorganized nature. Soldiers moved to cover positions without needing orders. Fire teams supported each other automatically, covering retreats and advances in patterns that seemed almost instinctive. Sergeant Cole took a position behind a collapsed wall, his rifle steady despite the chaos around him. Or noticed civilians running through the streets, humans who had somehow survived in the occupied city, now fleeing the battle in terror. Cole saw them too. He abandoned his cover and moved into the open street, placing himself between the fleeing civilians and the firing positions. Or watched bullets strike the ground around Cole's feet as he waved the civilians toward safety, shouting directions, completely exposed to enemy fire. A round struck Cole in the leg. He dropped to one knee but did not fall. He continued directing civilians, his face pale with pain but his voice steady. Only when the last civilian had passed did he allow himself to be dragged to cover by Corporal Santos. Or could not understand what he had just witnessed. The civilians had no strategic value. They slowed the military advance. They consumed resources. By any rational calculation, protecting them was a tactical error that nearly cost Cole his life. He asked Cole about it later, after Santos had treated the wound. Cole just shrugged and said he could not watch innocent people die if he could do something to help them. The battle continued through the morning. Private Park froze during a close ambush, his weapon hanging useless in his hands as soldiers approached, or expected the other humans to abandon him. A frozen soldier was a liability, a danger to everyone around him, a resource drain that rational military doctrine demanded be eliminated. Instead, Santos ran into the open and grabbed Park by his armor. She dragged him behind cover while bullets sparked off the walls around them. Then she held his face in her hands and spoke to him in a calm, steady voice, asking him simple questions about his home and his family, grounding him in reality until the panic faded from his eyes. Within minutes, Park was fighting again, imperfect but functional, a soldier who had failed transformed back into a soldier who could contribute. Or added this to his observations, but found he could not explain it in academic terms. The worst moment came in the afternoon. The 47th discovered a facility in the basement of a destroyed hospital. The smell hit them first, a mixture of chemicals and decay that made even hardened soldiers cover their faces. Inside, they found prisoners, human captives who had been used for biological experiments, but they also found something else. Civilians, prisoners of their own military, test subjects for weapons that the Dominion wanted to deploy against other species. Captain ordered the rescue of all prisoners. Or objected immediately. The civilians could be spies. They could slow the retreat. They would consume medical supplies that wounded humans needed. Every principle of rational warfare demanded they be left behind or eliminated as potential threats. Looked at him with those eyes he still could not read. "Cruelty is cruelty," she said. "It does not matter who suffers it. We did not come here to become monsters." The humans carried the prisoners out alongside their own people. Santos treated their wounds with the same care she gave to human soldiers. No one complained about the extra burden. They made camp that night in a partially intact building on the edge of the city, or could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sergeant Cole standing in that open street, choosing to die for strangers and somehow surviving anyway. He found Cole sitting alone near a window, looking out at the darkness. The photograph of his daughter was in his hands. Near Cole sat a small figure, one of the children they had rescued from the facility, a creature that should have been their enemy, whose species had killed human soldiers that very day. The child was eating from Cole's ration pack, food that Cole himself needed, calories that could mean the difference between strength and exhaustion in tomorrow's battle. Cole spoke softly to the child. They could not understand his words. The translator could not bridge the gap between their languages, but Cole talked anyway, his voice gentle and calm, telling the child that everything would be okay, that no one would hurt it anymore, that it was safe now. Or watched this scene, and felt something crack inside his understanding of the universe. He had called humans primitive. He had called them inefficient. He had believed that their emotions were weaknesses that more advanced species had evolved beyond. But now he sat in the darkness and wondered if perhaps his people had lost something important when they abandoned their capacity to feel. The child eventually fell asleep against Cole's side. Cole did not move. He sat perfectly still, protecting an enemy's child with his warmth, and stared out at the night with tears running silently down his face. Or did not record this in his official observations. Some things, he was beginning to understand, could not be reduced to data. 3 weeks passed in the war zone, or stopped taking clinical notes after the first week. His hands shook too much to write properly. He had witnessed 17 engagements. He had seen soldiers die in ways that would haunt his dreams forever. He had watched humans perform acts of violence that confirmed every fear the galaxy held about their species. But that was not what kept him awake at night. The violence was not exceptional. Every species in the galaxy had violence in their history. They were violent. Even the peaceful had once fought wars before they evolved beyond such primitive behavior. What kept her awake was everything else. Private Bate Graham died on a Tuesday morning. She was 23 years old and had been in the military for 2 years. She liked to sing old songs from Earth when she thought no one was listening, and she kept a small plant in her quarters that she watered every day without fail. Or learned all of this after her death. He learned it because the other soldiers could not stop talking about her, sharing memories as if speaking her name could keep her alive somehow. Bate Graham died protecting a group of diplomats who had come to negotiate with a local faction. When the bomber appeared overhead, Graham did not hesitate. She threw herself over the diplomats and used her body as a shield against the blast. She was not assigned to protect them. She did not know them. She had no orders, no instructions, no tactical reason to sacrifice herself. She simply saw people in danger and moved. One of the surviving diplomats asked, or why a human would die for strangers from another species, or could not answer. He did not understand it himself. He attended the memorial service that night. The humans gathered in a circle and spoke about Graham's life. They told funny stories and sad stories and stories that made no sense to anyone except the people who had known her. They laughed and cried, sometimes at the same time. Sergeant Cole played a recording of Graham singing one of her old songs. The quality was poor, captured on a personal device during a quiet moment in the barracks. But every human listened in complete silence, tears streaming down their faces, as if this imperfect recording was the most precious thing in the universe. Or stood at the edge of the circle and felt like an intruder in a sacred space. 2 days later, he watched Corporal Santos perform emergency surgery on a wounded soldier. The enemy had been left behind by his retreating unit, too injured to move, too damaged to pose a threat. Rational military doctrine demanded he be left to die or eliminated quickly. Santos spent 4 hours saving his life. Or watched her work, her hands moving with precision despite her exhaustion, her voice calm as she talked through each step of the procedure. When the surgery was complete and was stable, she sat beside him and monitored his vitals through the night. Why? Or finally asked her. He is your enemy, his people killed Private Graham, why save him? Santos looked at him with tired eyes. I became a medic to save lives, not to choose which lives deserve saving. She returned to monitoring her patient, or had no response. The hardest day came when Captain lost 12 soldiers in a single engagement. An ambush caught a patrol in a narrow valley, and by the time reinforcements arrived, the battle was already over. Or watched receive the news. Her face did not change. Her voice remained steady as she issued orders for body recovery and casualty notification. She appeared completely professional, completely in control, exactly what a commander should be. That night he found her in the communications room, writing letters. Not official notifications, which had already been sent through military channels, but personal letters to each family. Handwritten on actual paper, a resource so rare in the war zone that soldiers traded for it like currency. She knew everything about her fallen soldiers. She wrote about Specialist Amy Torres, who had wanted to be a teacher after the war and had spent her free time tutoring local children in the refugee camps. She wrote about Corporal Adams, who had proposed to his girlfriend before deployment and carried the ring in his pocket for luck. She wrote about Private First Class, whose mother was sick back on Earth and who had sent every spare credit home for medical bills. Wrote through the entire night. 12 letters, 12 soldiers, 12 families who would receive something more than an official form, who would know that their loved one had mattered to someone besides themselves. Or sat in the corner and watched. He did not speak, he did not record, he simply witnessed. Near dawn, he finally asked the question that had been building inside him for weeks. How do you carry this? How do you feel all of this pain and still function? Sealed the last letter before answering. Her eyes were red from exhaustion and grief, but her hands were steady. We do not have a choice, she said. If we stop feeling, we become no different from we become weapons instead of people. And if we lose our humanity, then what exactly are we fighting for? She gathered the letters and stood to leave. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at him. The galaxy thinks human violence is our defining characteristic. They are wrong. Our defining characteristic is that we refuse to let violence define us. We keep feeling even when it hurts. We keep caring even when it costs us everything. She walked out into the dawn light, carrying 12 letters that would break 12 families' hearts and somehow also comfort them. Or remained alone in the communications room for a long time. He thought about his people, who had evolved beyond emotion and considered themselves superior for it. He thought about the clean, efficient, painless existence they had built for themselves. And for the first time in his life, he wondered if they had evolved forward or backward. They launched their major offensive on a morning that had seemed almost peaceful, or had been eating breakfast with Sergeant Cole when the first reports came through. Enemy forces approaching from all directions. Reinforcements at least 5 days away. Evacuation routes blocked. Forward operating base Sentinel was surrounded. Or expected panic. He expected chaos and fear, and the collapse of discipline that his academic training told him should occur when a military force faced certain destruction. They had extensive records of such moments, clinical studies of how different species responded to hopeless situations. The humans did not follow the expected pattern. Captain gathered her soldiers in the main hall. She stood before them and explained the situation in clear, simple terms. They had them trapped. Help was coming but would not arrive in time. They would have to hold this position against overwhelming odds or die trying. She did not offer false hope. She did not pretend they would all survive. She simply laid out the facts and then asked them if they were ready. Every soldier in the room said yes, or watched them prepare for what should have been their final battle. They did not grow cold or distant or mechanical. Instead, they became more human, more connected to each other, more alive than he had ever seen them. They wrote letters to their families. Not quick notes, but long, detailed messages filled with love and memories and apologies for things left unsaid. Private Park spent an hour writing to his younger brother, giving advice about life that he would never get to deliver in person. They shared photographs and stories. Corporal Santos talked about her grandmother in Mexico who had taught her to heal with herbs before she learned modern medicine. Sergeant Cole described his daughter's first steps, her first words, the way she laughed when he made funny faces. They told jokes that made no sense to but left the humans laughing until they cried. The laughter and the tears blended together in a way that his translator could not process, emotions too complex for any algorithm to separate. The night before the expected assault, Private Park approached Captain with a request. He wanted to volunteer for a mission to destroy the main artillery position. Everyone understood that such a mission would be fatal. The artillery was too heavily defended for anyone to attack and survive. Refused him. "You have too much life left to live," she told him. "Your brother still needs you. Your parents still need you. I will not spend young lives when old ones will do." Before Park could argue, announced that she would lead the mission herself. The soldiers protested immediately. They shouted and argued and pleaded with her to change her mind. She was their commander. She was essential to the defense. She could not be risked on a suicide mission. Listened to all of them. Then she explained that she had been a soldier for 20 years. She had lived a full life. She had made peace with her choices. The young soldiers under her command had not. If someone had to die for the others to survive, she would rather it be her. Sergeant Cole asked her how she could be so calm about dying. "I am not calm," she admitted. "I am terrified, but fear does not excuse me from doing what needs to be done." She gave her personal data chip before she left. It contained her journals, her thoughts, her observations from years of military service. "Make sure the galaxy understands what we really are," she said. "Not the monsters they believe us to be. Just people. People who feel too much and care too deeply and will die for strangers because we cannot imagine doing otherwise." Or took the chip and could not find words to respond. Led a small team out into the darkness, or stood on the walls of the base and watched them disappear into the enemy-held territory. The soldiers around him were silent, watching their commander walk toward almost certain death. The explosion came 3 hours later. A massive fireball lit up the horizon as the artillery position was destroyed. The soldiers on the walls cheered and cried at the same time, celebrating the tactical victory while mourning the loss of their leader. But the cheering stopped when a figure appeared on the approach road, then another, then 3 more. Captain was crawling. Both her legs were badly wounded, leaving dark trails of blood on the ground behind her. Her uniform was burned and torn. She should have been dead several times over. The soldiers rushed out to bring her in. Corporal Santos worked frantically to stop the bleeding, calling out orders to anyone who could help. Was barely conscious, her eyes unfocused, her breathing shallow and ragged. Or reached her side and asked the only question he could think of. "How are you still alive? No one could survive what you just did." Eyes found his face. She smiled, a small and painful expression that somehow contained more warmth than anything he had ever seen. "I promised my soldiers I would come back," she whispered. "A human promise is not easy to break." She lost consciousness then. Santos continued her desperate work, refusing to let her commander die, fighting against injuries that should have been immediately fatal. Or stood back and watched the humans save their leader through sheer determination. They worked through the night, refusing to accept what seemed inevitable, pouring their combined will into keeping one person alive. By dawn was stable. The reinforcements were only 2 days away now. The assault had been delayed by the destruction of their artillery. Against all logic, against all probability, they were going to survive. Or looked at the exhausted humans around him and realized he had stopped thinking of them as subjects to be studied. Somewhere in the past weeks, they had become something else entirely. They had become his people. The reinforcements arrived on schedule. Fresh troops poured into forward operating Base Sentinel, bringing supplies and medical equipment and the promise of relief for the exhausted 47th Infantry Division. They were pushed back, their offensive broken, their forces retreating to regroup for battles that would happen elsewhere. For the soldiers of the 47th, this particular war was over. Or stood in the communications room and prepared his report for the Galactic Council. He had been assigned to document human military operations, to provide the academic analysis that his species was famous for, to explain humanity to a galaxy that feared and misunderstood them. He deleted every observation from his first 2 weeks. All the clinical notes about human inefficiency and emotional weakness, all the academic terminology that reduced these people to data points, all the comfortable conclusions that had allowed him to feel superior. They were lies, lies told by someone who had not understood what he was watching. He began again. The report started with the horrors he had witnessed, but not the horrors the galaxy expected to hear about. He wrote about Sergeant Danny Cole, who had risked his life for civilians with no strategic value, and then wept over the body of a child caught in crossfire. The child belonged to the enemy. Its death served human interests, but Cole would carry that small body in his memory forever, would see that face in his dreams, would feel that weight on his soul until the day he died. He wrote about Corporal Maria Santos, who had spent 4 hours saving an enemy soldier because she could not stand by and watch any creature die if she had the power to help. She had trained for years to preserve life, and she refused to let war make her betray that training. He wrote about Private Park, who had frozen in battle and been saved by soldiers who could have left him behind. He wrote about Private Bate Graham, who had died protecting diplomats from a species not her own, acting on instinct so deep that she did not have time to consider whether it made sense. He wrote about Captain Laura, who had walked into certain death for her soldiers and then refused to die because she had promised to come back. The galaxy feared human violence, or wrote, this fear was understandable but misplaced. Human violence was not exceptional. Every species in recorded history had demonstrated capacity for violence. They were violent. They were violent. Even the peaceful had fought wars in their distant past. What made humans different was not their ability to destroy. It was their refusal to be destroyed. Not physically. Humans died as easily as any other species. Their bodies were fragile, they're short, their technology inferior to most galactic civilizations. In purely physical terms, they were among the weakest species or had ever studied. But they could not be broken in the ways that mattered. They refused to become what war demanded. They remained soft in a universe that rewarded hardness. They remained kind in circumstances that excused cruelty. They kept feeling when numbness would have been easier, kept caring when indifference would have been safer. The galaxy did not know that human soldiers adopted enemy orphans. Sergeant Cole had filed papers to bring the child home with him, to raise it as his own, to give an enemy's offspring the same love he gave his human daughter. The galaxy did not know that human medics saved enemy wounded. Santos had performed surgery on 17 soldiers during the campaign, spending resources and exhausting herself for beings who would have killed her without hesitation. The galaxy did not know that human commanders wrote personal letters to the families of every soldier lost under their command. Had done this for every death in her 20-year career, hundreds of letters, each one unique, each one filled with specific memories and genuine grief. This was the true horror of humanity, or wrote, not their violence but their compassion, not their cruelty but their stubborn, irrational, beautiful insistence on remaining human no matter what the universe did to them. He concluded his report with a warning to the Galactic Council. Do not make enemies of humanity, not because they will destroy you. Many species can destroy, they can destroy, they can destroy. Destruction is common in this galaxy. Do not make enemies of humanity because of what they will do when they defeat you. They will help you rebuild. They will treat your wounded and feed your hungry and protect your children. They will extend mercy to those who showed them none. They will offer friendship to those who tried to kill them. And that impossible kindness, that irrational compassion in the face of everything, is more terrifying than any weapon ever created. Because it cannot be fought. It cannot be defended against. It seeps through cracks in the hardest hearts and plants seeds that grow into something the galaxy has never seen before. Or signed the report and added a personal note at the end. He was not returning to Prime. His people had evolved beyond emotion, beyond connection, beyond the messy and painful experience of truly living. They considered this advancement. They considered themselves superior. Or now understood that they had simply become less. He had requested permanent reassignment to human space. He did not fully understand these people. Their logic escaped him. Their emotions overwhelmed him. Their capacity for simultaneous violence and tenderness confused every model he had ever learned. But he wanted to spend the rest of his life among them anyway. He wanted to learn what they had forgotten. He wanted to feel what his people had abandoned. He wanted to understand how a species so fragile could also be so unbreakable. The transport shuttle was leaving in an hour, or gathered his belongings and walked to the landing platform, where Captain was waiting to see him off. She was in a wheelchair, her legs still healing, but she had insisted on being present. "Will your people accept your report?" she asked. "They will not understand it, or admit it, but perhaps they need to hear things they do not understand." Smiled, "That might be the most human thing you have ever said." Or performed the formal farewell gesture, then abandoned it halfway through and simply took her hand instead. Human contact, warm and imperfect and strangely comforting. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me see who you really are." Squeezed his hand gently. "Come back and visit sometime. We might even be at peace by then." Or boarded the shuttle and watched 4 shrink below him. The war zone became a landscape, became a planet, became a point of light among millions. Somewhere down there, humans were still fighting and dying and crying and laughing, still carrying weights they did not have to carry, still choosing love in places that only offered reasons for hate. The galaxy did not know what humans truly were. But Or knew, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to explain it.